Hi everyone, this is Michelle from MaMi's Quilts. Welcome back to our virtual classroom. Today our class is on the Fractured Portrait 2.0, as you can see hanging to my right. This one was done with the heavy metals from collection from Northcott, and this was done in the gold colorway. And today we're going to do the Fractured 2.0 in the same collection, heavy metal, in the pewter colorway. So just a few things before we get started. Supply list basically is just your regular supplies that you use for quilting. Just make sure you have a couple rulers, a 6x24 rectangle ruler and a square, either a 12-inch or a 15-inch square. Other than that, you make sure you have some labels on hand, some paper clips possibly, and just the things that you normally use for quilting. So today we're using the kit that we've made here at MaMi's Quilts for the Fractured Portrait 2.0. So if you purchase that kit, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to have your pattern, and then you're going to have your fabrics A to G plus the panel. So it will be labeled like this in your kit, and then of course the pattern is also included with the kit. So we're doing this with the heavy metal collection from Northcott, but this pattern is very versatile. It can be done with numerous different fabric collections. And also, originally the pattern was designed to use the smaller panels that are about 21 by 42 inches. So it's a different take, I guess, on our original Fractured Portrait, which is using the big panel that was 30 by 42. This one is using the smaller one. And you can see also it's a panel that runs horizontally, not vertically. So that's the best choice. If you're using a panel, it should be running vertically, not horizontally, not vertically. Now, having said that, you don't need to use a panel. It's a perfect way to showcase some beautiful fabrics that you don't want to necessarily cut up into little pieces, so we can use yardage there instead of a panel. We've gone ahead and we've made kits in various different colorways. I've got a Notion also by Northcott, where instead of a panel we are using yardage for those four big pieces in the center of the quilt. We've also done it with the Bliss collection, also by Northcott. So it can be done with very many different fabrics. So don't get stuck on our example here. You can definitely think outside of the box. Lots of room for that. So having said that, we're going to jump into this class. So like I said, your fabrics are laid out. So we're going to start by opening up our pattern and going to our cutting instructions. So you'll have on page 1 is going to be your cutting instructions, and we're going to start with fabric A. So I'm just going to move my fabrics to the side and pull out my fabric A. Just put that there. So for this one, we're going to need to cut 2 10.5-inch strips by width of fabric. So you're going to lay your fabric out like such, with your fold down close to you at the bottom of your mat, and your selvage should be at the top. Okay, so we're going to start by squaring off our fabric. So I'm just going to grab my square. So you just need a square, and the important part for the other ruler is that it's 24 inches in length. It can be 8 inches wide, 6.5, 8.5, it doesn't matter. Just the 24 is what's important. So I'm just going to run a line on my ruler. So I'm just using my 3/4 inch line here, running on the fold of my fabric down here. And I'm just going to move that over just a little bit because you don't want to cut off more than you really need to. And then butt my 6x24 against my square, and then I'm just going to square this off. And you can see I'm just inching my hand up as I'm cutting so that my ruler doesn't swerve to the left. So once we have that square, we're going to cut 2 10.5-inch strips. So my ruler is actually 8.5, so that means I need to add 2 more inches to make that 10.5. So I'm going to put the 2-inch line from my square ruler. So 1, 2, plus my 8.5. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5. Gives me 10.5. And then I'm just going to cut. So again, I'm just inching up my hand as I'm cutting so that my ruler doesn't swerve. I'm just going to move that a little bit and then move this over to cut my second 10.5-inch strip. So my 2-inch line from my square is on the edge of my fabric, plus my 8.5 gives me 10.5. So this is just an extra bit. So now we're just going to subcut these into 10.5-inch squares. So we're going to turn them this way. Just going to move that one out of the way. So the first thing you want to do is cut your selvage off. And I'm just going to use my square for this. So I'm just going to cut my selvage off. So you just want to get past that white of the selvage. So get that. And we need 7 10.5. So you're going to put your 10.5-inch line on the edge of your fabric. It's always important to double check that you've got the right line. So you should have 10.5 this way and you should have 10.5 this way, and it should be nice and square all the way around. So that's going to give us 2, because I'm cutting, I didn't open up my strip. And I'm going to cut 2 more out of this strip. So again, just making sure 10.5 down here, 10.5 on the left. And we're going to cut that. So now we have 4. And I'm just going to put them all right side up. So that is 4. So we need to cut 3 more. So I am going to, and I'll put my label back on that for now. I'm going to leave my strip folded in half for this first cut, which will give us 2. So again, your 10.5-inch line is on the left side of your fabric. And your 10.5 should be on the bottom. So if, when you're doing this and you see maybe that you're not quite straight here, you're best to make this straight and just give yourself a little bit extra, and then you can go back and re-square this side, which I'll show you here. So I find I didn't quite cut that right, so I'm going to go back and re-square that. So that gives us 2 more. So I need 1 more. So I'm just going to open this up. So you're going to have 1 layer here. So we're going to cut 1 more 10.5. That gives us our 7. So now we need to cut 2 10.5 by 4.5. And I'm just going to turn my fabric around because I don't want to deal with this fold. So I'm just going to cut from the other side, and we'll do 4.5. So So you should have your 10.5-inch line on the bottom and your 4.5-inch line on the left side of your fabric. So that's one, and I'm going to cut that again. So 4.5. And this piece is extra, so that'll go into our extra pile. Okay, so before we carry on, we're going to grab our labels, and in the pattern it says to label these two pieces A2, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So I'll do that. And your 10.5 by 10.5-inch squares are going to be labeled A1. So we're going to label those like that. So at this point, you can grab a paper clip or a pin, and just to keep those together, I'm just going to use a paper clip, and I'm just going to put these two pieces together, the same fabric, my fabric A, so A1 and A2. So I'm just going to put those together, and we'll just put those right now to the side. And we're going to carry on with fabric B. So we're going to do the exact same thing for fabrics B, C, and D. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those, and you can follow along, or just pause me and go ahead and do it on your own and then start me up again. So same thing, we're just going to square first. Move your square away. And just take that first cut to square your fabric. And again, we're going to need two 10.5-inch strips. So you're going to put your 2-inch ruler or 2-inch line on the left side of your squared edge of your fabric, and we're going to put the 8.5-inch ruler against that to give us 10.5. I'm just going to move that a little bit and then do that again. So again, 2-inch line on the edge of your fabric. Cut. So this is an extra piece, which will go into our extra pile. So again, we're just going to turn these and we're going to cut 7 10.5-inch strips or squares, sorry, but the first thing we're going to do is just remove our selvage. So 10.5-inch on the left side of your fabric. And you should have 10.5 inches down here. So that gives us 2. We'll cut 2 more. Piece is going to be an extra piece. So that gives us 4 squares. And we're going to go ahead and cut 2 more off of this strip once we take our selvage off. first cut, so I'm just going to go back and re-square that. Okay, so that gives us 6. And now we need 2 4.5-inch, or we need one more. We need one more 10.5. So we have to open up that strip and cut a 10.5-inch to give us our 7. And we're going to now cut 2 4.5, and again I'm just going to turn this so that the fold is to my right, and I'm going to cut 2 4.5-inch strips. So that's 1. And this is an extra piece. So again, we're going to label these. So we've got 7 of these guys. Which we're going to label B1 for the 10.5-inch squares, and B2 for the 10.5 by 4.5. And again, I'm just going to put these together and paper clip these and put them to the side. Then I'll do the same thing for my C fabric. So again, I'm just going to square. So I'm just running a line through the bottom of my fabric. And then I'm going to butt up my 24-inch ruler against my square. Move my square away. So again, the 2-inch line is on the edge of your fabric. Doesn't work that way. The 2-inch line of your square needs to be on the left of your fabric, and butt up your 24-inch ruler to give you 10.5. And then you're going to cut another one. So I'm just going to move this one over a little bit. So 2-inch from your square on the left side of your fabric again, and butt up your 8.5-inch ruler. This is an extra piece. And again, we're just going to rotate these and cut 7 10.5-inch squares. I don't need this. So again, we want to make sure we cut off the selvage. And we want 10.5 inches by 10.5 inches. So one strip will give you 4 10.5 by 10.5. This is an extra piece, so we'll put these guys together. So we're going to cut the selvage off again. So we're just going to cut one 10.5-inch square here while it's folded in half to give us 6 squares. So that'll give us the 6. We're going to open up the strip so it's a single layer now, so that we can cut one more to give us our 7. So that's our 7. And again, I'm just going to turn that around so the fold's on my right hand side, and I'm going to cut 2 4.5-inch pieces by 10.5. This is an extra piece. So again, we're just going to take these pieces and label them. So you're going to have your 10.5 by 10.5 is going to be C1. And your 4.5 by 10.5 is going to be C2. So we'll just put those together like that. And you can pin those or paper clip them. I'll just put them to the side for now. Oh, there's one right here. I'll need one more though. So our last fabric to do the 10.5-inch strips is going to be our D fabric. Same as the other 3, we're just going to square this off. So you're going to put a line on the bottom of your fabric. Take your 24-inch ruler and butt it up against your square. Then move your square away. So now we want 2 10.5-inch strips again. So we're going to take the 2-inch line on your square, put that on the left edge of your fabric that you just squared, and butt up your ruler against that and cut. So that's one, and we're going to cut a second one. Piece. So again, we're just going to rotate these, self-cut them. So first thing you're going to do is cut your selvage off. And then cut 10.5-inch squares. So out of one strip, you're going to get 4 of them. So that's 2. that gives us 4 out of that first strip. So out of your second strip, we only need 3, so we're going to cut one 10.5 inch cut while it's still folded in 2. So that's going to give us 6. So to get our 7th one, we're just going to open this up. So that's going to give us our 7th. And for this one, we're just going to turn it so that our fold is on the right hand side. And then we're going to cut 2 4.5 by 10.5 inch pieces. Piece. So again, we're just going to label these. So this is going to be D1 is going to be your 10.5 by 10.5, and your D2 is going to be your 4.5 by 10.5. We're just going to put that like that. Grab a paper clip. Clip that together and put it to the side for now. So we got A, B, C, and D are now cut. We're going to move to our E fabric, which is our accent triangles. So we can take that. And this one we're going to cut 7 8.5 inch strips. So again, I'm going to start by squaring off my fabric. So, and this time we're going to need 7 strips of 8.5. So when you're doing that many strips, you may have to square after 3 or 4 cuts, just re-square your fabric if you find it's not staying straight. You just need to square up your fabric again. My ruler is 8.5, so it's just going to be my full ruler. This is just an extra piece. So we now have 7 strips of 8.5, and these are going to be subcut into 8.5 by 8.5 inch squares. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and cut off my selvage, and I'm just going to bring this like that. So the other thing you can do here is you can stack them, and so I can go ahead and show you how we would do that. If you're going to stack them, I would open them up like this. And just lay them one on top of the other. Just when you're doing this, you have to make sure that your strips are one on top of one another. You don't want them crooked, so you have to make sure they're fairly straight. So I'm going to go ahead and do 3 of these at a time. So I'm just going to cut off my selvage first. And you're doing 8.5 inch by 8.5 inch squares. So again, I'm just going to turn this around, and I'm going to work from my other side first. So I'll do the same thing here. I will cut my selvage off. That's 12 pieces. So before I cut this, I will press that out before I cut that. So I'm just going to put that to the side for now. So that was one way of doing it, was stacking a few strips together. The other way you can do it is just to do like I was doing my other ones, and just leave your strip folded in half and cut 2 at a time. And you can stack a couple of these up at the same time as well. So we're just going to do that. So just a couple different ways you can do it. And of course, if you're not a confident cutter, you can definitely just do like I was doing my A, B, C, and D fabrics. Just do 1 strip at a time, fold it in half, or you can open them up and cut them 1 at a time as well. It's whatever you're comfortable doing at this stage of your quilting career, I guess we'll call it. Because for sure, cutting is one of the scariest things when quilters start, is the cutting part. So it's whatever you're mostly comfortable with. All right, so we're going to do. So right now we're cutting 4 at a time. So the other thing too, when you're starting to cut multiple strips like this, you want to make sure that you have a sharp blade, because that's not going to make the experience very very happy if you're struggling with your rotary cutter. You should have a very sharp blade when you're cutting multiple strips like this. Okay, so we're going to cut 1 more. So I'm gonna just keep on cutting here, and then we're gonna label these. So I believe we have 28 here. I will double check that before when we start doing our project. These are going to be extras for the moment. If you do need to use these ones that have the fold, make sure you press them first, because that will definitely make your square bigger if you don't press it first. Because when you do press it, it's going to make it flatter. So again, we're going to just paper clip these together, and these are going to be labeled E1. So we'll just do that and put those to the side. So now we're going to move on to our sashing fabric, which is fabric F. And these we're going to cut 18 2.5-inch strips. So because we have so many of these to cut, I'm just going to leave my fabric folded in half, so you can see here that I have it just folded like this. Fold it right in half, so I'm cutting through 4 layers of fabric. And again, we're just going to start by squaring this up. So the other option here for cutting is if you have a strip ruler by June Taylor, you can also use that for this. If you have the 2.5-inch slot ruler, this works really well for that. I don't have mine here right now, so we're just going to cut it this way. So it's going to be 2.5. 2.5-inch strips is what we need. We're going to square this off first. And we're cutting 18 2.5-inch strips. So I'm cutting 2 at a time here. So that means if you're doing it that way, that means you need to do 9 cuts. So that's going to be 2. so once you've done cutting those ones, these are going to be subcut into 32 10.5-inch strips. So we're just going to put these up here for now. And before we subcut this, we're going to just cut the rest of our with a fabric strip. So we're going to need, out of the rest of this fabric, we need 8 strips at 4.5 inches. That'll be for your borders. So 4.5. So again, I'm cutting 2 at a time here. Going to be 2. This is 4. This piece is extra. So this is our 8. And we're just going to put those away. These are for our borders, so we don't need those right away. And before we move on to our G, we're going to subcut these guys. So we're going to, again, you can do multiple strips at a time here. If you leave them folded, just going to cut these at, you need 32 at 10.5, and then you'll need 5 strips for your long sashings. So you don't, make sure you don't cut them all at 10.5. You just need 32. So the best thing probably is just to count out 5 of these right away and put them with your border strips that we just put to the side. And those will be used for your vertical sashings in the quilt. So these long strips in here. So right now we're subcutting these ones at 10.5. So again, before you do that, before you subcut the 10, just go ahead and cut your selvage off. And this is an area where if you have a smaller ruler, it's just a little bit less cumbersome than your big one. So you can just take a narrower ruler to do these subcuts if you have one handy. So you're going to do 10.5. And 10.5. So the reason I like to cut my strips this way is I never use my fold, which I always try to avoid. Doesn't matter what I'm doing, just because it's hard to press out, so I just avoid it. But the one thing you have to remember when you're cutting with your strips folded in half like this is that you're cutting with the top one right side up and the bottom one is wrong side up. So we need to repile these the right way. So the top one stays right side up and the bottom one flips to right side up. Especially with this fabric, it's a little bit harder to see that, so I'm going to do it right away as I'm going along here. So this one's wrong side up. This one stays right side up. Okay, so we now have 8 pieces. So I've finished cutting my 2.5 by 10.5 inch pieces, and I have them all right side up so that I know that they're ready to go. So I'm going to label these ones F1. And put those with my other pieces. So the 5 pieces of sashing that we put to the side are going to be labeled F2. Paper clip those ones together, and I'll put those to the side as well. Okay, so the sashing pieces I had you put to the side, I had told you to put 5 pieces to the side. You actually need 10 pieces of sashing, and those pieces we're going to label F2. So now we're going to move on to fabric G, which is your binding. And this one is going to be 2.5 inch strips. And this is, if you don't like doing a 2.5 inch strip, that's fine. You can cut them at 2 1/4. But we've allowed for a 2.5 and probably a little bit more. So if you want to cut a wider binding, just make sure you measure your piece that you have to make sure that you have enough to cut a wider one. So same thing, we're going to do a 2.5 and we're going to cut 10 strips. So again, I'm just going to square up my fabric. And we're doing 2.5. And again, you could definitely just fold this in half and do 2 at a time if you wanted to. So maybe wondering why I'm cutting my binding right now. Those of us who have been quilting for a while have more than once used our binding fabric for another project. And then when we finish this one, we say, we don't have the fabric that we need anymore for this project. So we've learned to cut our binding as we're cutting everything else. We'll label it fabric G, and I will also put on there binding so that I know that I have my binding for my project. So if I don't get it done right away, I still have it. We have our 10 strips cut for the binding. So again, I'm just going to clip these together. And this is your fabric G. And I'm going to put binding on here. Make sure that stays with my project, and I'll just put that with my borders for now. So now we're moving on to our panel. So we need to square this up to 42 by 22.5. So if you have a nice big cutting board, you can leave this in half, and I'm just going to see here where I'm at. So I'm just putting the edge of my actual pattern is on my 0 here. So I actually have 23.5. So I have an inch for squaring, because these panels are never cut straight. So what I'm going to do is just move this over. I am going to square up this side of my panel. And I'll take about 1/2 inch of the actual panel. So now I'm just going to rotate my fabric. And I'm going to put that cut edge right on my zero on my mat. And I'm going to cut on the 22.5 inch line over here. So it should be square at the top. So we've got 22.5 and we've got 22.5 up there. Okay, so I've got 22.5. So now I'm going to open this up this way. I guess before, if you want to make sure you have your 42 inches, if you leave it square and just turn it this way, put your fold on the zero, and we can cut this down this way to 42. So we can, so 21 is what we need. 21 times 2 is 42 inches. And if you want to allow yourself just a little bit, you can cut this just a little bit bigger because we're going to be cutting across the panel and you don't want to be short at the end. So if you want to cut just a little bit more, you can. But I'm going to cut right on the 42 here. So when you're doing this and when you're folded in half, you gotta make sure you do your math properly. So just calculate it a couple times to make sure you have it right. So 21 times 2 is 42, and that's what we need. Okay, so now we have our 22.5 by 42. So now what we're going to do is open this up and we're going to subcut this into 4 10.5 by 22.5 inch pieces. So your panel should be horizontal, and this panel can go either way, so it just depends what's more pleasing to your eye. If you want it this way, I think I want it this way. So now I'm going to cut 10.5. So my ruler is 8.5. Plus 2 on my square is going to give me 10.5. So this should be nice and square at the bottom as well. Okay, so this is going to be your first cut. That first piece is going to be labeled H1. So we're going to label these as we're going. So you're going to need an H1, H2, H3, and H4. So the first cut is going to be H1. So I'm just going to move that over. My second one is going to be H2. It's important to keep your panel pieces in order because if you move them around, they're not going to make sense when you put them back together again. this one is going to be H2. So I'm going to put that over here. And the next one's going to be H3. One, and this one should be 10.5. So this is where if you allowed yourself a little bit of room at the end, you would just trim off that last little piece at the end. But I cut mine at 42 and I ended up at 42, which is where we should be. So this one's going to be H4. So that brings us to the end of our cutting. So now we're going to get set up for starting to do the assembly. So I'm just going to be back in a second and we're going to start that right away. All right, we're ready to do the assembly for our Fractured Portrait 2.0. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your pile of E1 blocks, that's your 8.5 by 8.5 E-fabric blocks, and we're going to draw a diagonal on all of these blocks on the wrong side of your block. So I'm just going to do a couple here just to get you started. So I'm just putting my ruler from corner to corner and I'm just drawing a line. And I'm just using a regular pen right now so that you can see what I'm doing. But you can use a friction pen or you can use a chalker. It's just whatever is going to work best for you to see that line on your squares. It's going to get cut off. Actually, it won't get cut off, so it will stay on your fabric. It will be in your seam allowance, but it will still be there. So you don't want something that's going to penetrate through to the front of your fabric. So I'm just going to do a few more. I'm just going to do a few here. You can go ahead and do all of them if you want. This way they're all done. And they're all done the same way. So just from corner to corner. Like that. Okay, so I've got 4. I'll just stop there. Alright, so I'm just going to move these to the side. So what you're going to do is we're going to bring out our A1, B1, C1, and D1 squares that we cut, our 10.5 inch squares. I'm going to show you how to do one of each one, and then you'll go ahead and do all of them. And I'll go and do mine. So you're going to take your A1 block first, right side up, and you're going to take one of the E1 blocks. And this is important because some of these, if your fabric is directional, you have to make sure that it's the right way, like sitting the right way when you're putting it down here. I mean, this one is not directional, so it doesn't matter. But if it is directional, it will matter. And then your E1 square goes in the top left. So just like in the pattern, diagram 3. So you want to make sure that your diagonal is going this way and not that way. Okay, so your diagonal should be going from top right to bottom left. And what you're going to do now is go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch seam away from that line. So you're going to be sewing, or you're going to be sewing on the line, sorry. So on the line, and then we're going to trim it off after. So A1 block, your E1 goes in the top left corner, and we're going to go sew that block. So now I'll do that right now. before you press, we're going to trim a 1/4 of an inch away from that sew line that we just did. So making sure that your 10-inch square is peeking out here on the left. So you're going to be putting you're going to put your 1/4 inch line on the seam that you just sewed, and we're going to cut a 1/4 of an inch away from it. So you're just going to take your cutter, push that away, and now we're just going to go ahead and press that like that. Okay, so it's important here when you're sewing your line that you're sewing right in the corner, like right in here, and you're finishing right in the corner, because if you go past that line that you've drawn, you're gonna, when you go to press this, you're gonna have a jog like this in your block. It's not gonna, you're not gonna have a straight line like that. Okay, so it's important that you're sewing right on the corner of your block when you're doing a diagonal. So I'm gonna press that in a second here. I'm just gonna put it to the side. Then I'm gonna pull my B block down. And again, this one is not directional. You've got numbers going upside down and sideways and sort of letters, so it doesn't matter which way it's going, but whatever way it's going to sit, you're going to take your pattern, flip your page, and now you're seeing that for your B square, you want to have your E1 square in the bottom. Oops. Bottom right hand side of your square, so just like it is in the picture here. So your accent triangle is in the bottom right, and again the diagonal is going from top right to bottom left, and I'm just going to go ahead and sew that. So again, we're going to trim a 1/4 of an inch away from that sew line. So you're putting your 1/4 inch line on the seam that you've just sewn, and you're going to cut a 1/4 of an inch away from it. So your B block is going to look like this. So you'll go ahead and do all of your B's this way. Now we're going to set up the C. So we'll bring down one of your C blocks. So your C block, you're going to want to put your E triangle in the top right corner. So like that. And again, you want to have your diagonal is running from top left to bottom right. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew that. All right, so again, you're going to take your ruler, put it your 1/4 inch line on this seam that you've just sewn, and you're cutting a 1/4 of an inch away from it. So this one is going to look like this. Then we'll bring down our D. And this one we want to have our E1 square in the bottom left corner. And again, you want to make sure that your diagonal is the top left down to the bottom right. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew that. Again, we're just going to put our 1/4 inch line on that line that we've just sewn. and cut 1/4 inch away from it. Okay, so now we're just going to press those. So your D block should look like that, and I'm just going to go ahead and press. So when you're pressing, it's always nice to just set your seam and then just press it over. So this is how your blocks should be here. I'm just going to put the tags on so you can see. So your A1s should look like this. Your B1s should look like that. And your C1s should look like that. And that's just the same as in your page 1 and 2 of your pattern. And your D should look like that. So you're going to go ahead and do that. So all of your A's are going to look like the one that I've just built. Your B's are going to be all the same. Your C's are going to be all the same, and your D's are going to be all the same. So you can go ahead and build those. I'm going to go build mine, and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back with all my pieces for the Fractured Portrait 2.0. So we've gone ahead and sewn our A to D blocks with our accent triangles, and just as something that I've done with mine is I've relabeled my A1 blocks and put which corner my accent triangle is supposed to be in. So for the A block, it should be in the top left, and for your B block, it should be in the bottom right hand corner. So the reason I've done that is just I have a visual right away of where that accent triangle is supposed to be, so I'm not twisting my blocks the wrong way. So your C should be in the top right, and your D should be in the bottom left. So to start the assembly, make sure you have all your pieces at hand. So you should have all of your A to D, your A1 blocks with the accent triangle sewn in, ready to go. You should also have your A1 or A2 to D2 rectangles. That's those smaller pieces we cut. They should be ready to go as well. You should have your F1 sashing pieces, and you should also have your H1 to H4 panel pieces, which are going to be in the center of your quilt. So we need all of those pieces to do the assembly at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my page 2 of my pattern, and there we have a chart that lays out columns 1 to 6. And I'm going to do that for you on the design wall here. I'm going to lay out 3 columns at a time so that you can see them clearly, and then we'll go ahead and sew those together. So we're going to start with our column 1 is going to start with our A1 block. So again, make sure that your accent triangle is at the top left. And pretty easy, in between all of your blocks here, you're going to have a sashing piece, which I'm just going to offset a little bit so it's easier to see. Then we're going to have a B1. Another sashing piece. Then we go to C. So this first column is pretty easy. We start with A, we go down to B to C. sashing piece, and then D, and then sashing. Then we're going to start again with an A, sashing, and then we're going to do a B, a B1, with another sashing, and then your bottom piece is going to be a C2. So you're going to grab one of these smaller pieces and put that at the bottom. So that's your column 1 setup. So just at a quick glance, you can see it's kind of forming a pattern. You should be forming this kind of a bigger triangle of your accent triangles going this way. So if you're not seeing that pattern, it means that you've twisted your blocks some way. So just go back and verify, making sure that your A has the accent in the top left, B in the bottom right, C top right, and D bottom left. So that's the important part in this quilt to create that pattern, is to make sure those accent triangles are in the right corner. So that's column 1. Column 2, we're going to carry on. So that one we're going to start with the B, a B2 piece. So that's going to be a smaller piece. So we're going to have that one at the top. And again, between each of your focus pieces, you're going to have a sashing piece. So then we're going to go to a C1, which is this guy. And then we'll put another F1. So now we're going to have your H1, and again, it's important here that you've labeled your panel pieces. So ours is H1, and I put my label right side up on my panel so that I know that this is the right side up. I don't have it turned around. I had talked about that when we were cutting the panel. So this is an indication that if this would be upside down right now, I know that my piece is upside down. So make sure your label is right side up. And after that H1, we're going to put another F1 piece. And then we're going to go to a B1. Which is this one. With another sashing. And then we're going to do a C1. With another sashing. And we're going to finish off with a D1. So that's your column number 2. And then we're moving on to column number 3. We're going to start with a D1. And again, the sashing in between. And then we're going to do an A1. With a sashing. And then we're going to grab our H2 piece of our panel. And again, make sure your label is the right way up. And we're going to put a sashing. And then we're going to go to a D1. Another piece of sashing. And then we're going to do an A1. With a sashing. And then our last piece in our third column is going to be the smaller piece again, which is going to be the B2, which is going to be this guy here. All right, so we've got our columns 1, 2, and 3 set up. So at this point, I'm going to go and sew this, I'm just going to leave this up. So that you have to figure out how you're going to move this from the design wall to your machine without mixing up your pieces. So I have my machine close by. If you don't, or if you have to go a ways away to do this, I would probably start stacking from the bottom up. This way, when you go to your machine, you can just sew everything in order. So I'll just show you briefly what I mean by that. So I would just grab a ruler or a smaller mat that's fairly stiff, and I would just pick up my pieces from the bottom up. So I would have my C2, and making sure that you have the side that you're sewing should be at the top. So this is the top of my piece here. And then I would stack my sashing on top, like that. And then put my next piece on. And then just keep stacking all the way up. So my first piece is up, and what you're going to do is just go to your machine and sew those end to end to end till you get to the bottom of your column, and then I would come back and grab my next one and do the same thing. So I'm going to go do that, and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I'm setting up, I have already set up columns 4, 5, and 6 for you. So again, I've just set this up going back to my page 2 of my pattern, and just to quickly go over the blocks. In column 4, you have an A2 with an F1 in between. Then you have a B1, F1, C1, F1, and then you have your H3 block of your panel, and again, making sure it's the right side up. Then we go back to an F1 and a B1, F1, and another C1. So that's column 4. And then column 5, we have a C1 with an F1 in between, D1, F1, A1, F1 with your last panel piece, H4. Again, making sure it's right side up with an F1, D1, F1, and then a D2, or an A2, sorry, at the bottom. And then your column 6, you have a D2 at the top with an F1, A1, F1, you have a B1, F1, C1, D1, F1, A1, F1, and finishing off with a B1. Just a little note, when we were cutting our pieces, the D2s, I had you cut 2 each of the A2, B2, C2, and D2. You really only need 1 of the C1 or C2 and 1 of the D1. So we have put a little edit in the beginning of that to fix that up, but if you've missed it, you will have 2 extra pieces which can be used for something else. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these, and I'll be right back with my 6 columns. Hi everyone, I'm back with our columns all sewn together for Fractured Portrait 2.0. So you can see I have my columns here in order. So the next step is going to be to put our F2 sashing pieces in between each of the columns. So in the pattern, you'll notice that we've given you an ish measurement. I think it was 76.5-ish. And the reason we do that is just to bring your attention to the fact that you need to measure the column. So I went ahead and measured mine. Mine are actually 76 instead of 76.5. And all that means is that when I was sewing, my 1/4 inch was probably a full 1/4 inch, which is fine. It's just like tension in knitting. Everyone has their own tension. In sewing, we kind of have our own 1/4 inch seam allowance. It can either be a scant, which is a narrower 1/4 inch, or you can be right on a 1/4 inch, or you can have a full 1/4 inch, which is slightly more than a 1/4 inch. Now that none of that really matters as long as it's consistent all the way through your quilt. So that's the reason why we will give you an ish measurement for borders and for sashing, because at this point, if your column is slightly bigger or longer or shorter than the measurement that we will give you, which will be a right on measurement, it's going to create some fullness, or it will stretch your inside piece, so it won't make a nice square quilt. So that's why we do that. So at this point, you're going to grab the 10 F2 pieces, sashing pieces that we've cut, and you're going to sew them in pairs. So you'll have 5 sashing pieces in the end. So you're going to go ahead and sew those end on end. So you'll have 5 pairs of the F2 pieces sewn together. And then you're going to measure your columns, and I would measure all of them and take the average. So that means you're going to add all 6 together and then divide by 6, which will give you the average measurement of the length of your columns. So once you've done that, then you will cut those strips into that measurement. So for us, that turns out to be 76. So I'm going to cut my 5 sashing pieces at 76 inches, and then I will go ahead and sew them in between my columns. So at that point, your quilt, the center of your quilt will be done, and then we're going to add the borders. And I'll just go through that right now before I go ahead and sew all that together. So same principle, you have 8 border pieces. So again, you're going to sew them in pairs so that you're going to end up with 4 lengths, 1 for each side. And it's the same thing that we just did for our columns. You're going to measure the 2 sides of your quilt, add them together, divide by 2, and that will be the length that you need to cut those 2 borders at for the sides. And then you will repeat that process for the top and bottom borders. So you will measure the top and the bottom, add them together, divide by 2, and cut your last 2 remaining borders at that length, and then you will be done your quilt. So at this point, we also get our binding ready. So you can go ahead and grab your binding strips as well and sew them together. If you're not quilting your quilt right away, that's great, but make your binding, label it Fractured Portrait 2.0, and keep it somewhere where you will not be tempted to use it for something else. And then when you go to finish this one, you don't have a binding for it. So go ahead and do that. I'll go do my sewing and I'll be right back. Hi everyone, we are back with our Fractured Portrait 2.0 quilt. So ours is put together. You can see we have our sashing pieces in, as well as our border. So in this quilt, we've actually ended with the sashing fabric as our final border. You can definitely add another color to this quilt if you're looking for a little bit more, for more inches for the size of your quilt. You can definitely add one of these other colors in as a second border to this quilt. So you have options to grow this quilt without it looking funny. So at this point we are ready to quilt this quilt. As you can see on my other quilt that we have finished in the gold colorway, I have done a pantograph design to quilt this quilt, and it's just gears, so it goes very well with this quilt. So again, you have very many different options to quilt it. It just depends what you like for density of your quilting. And then just a reminder, you can see here that I'm holding my binding. We have ours ready to go, so we've actually joined all our strips together, pressed it, it's ready to go. It's something that I can't say often enough when I'm teaching, is keep your binding with your project. Make it part of your piecing process. When you're piecing your quilt, get your binding ready, and then it can stay with your quilt, because so often I have ladies coming back to me and saying, I used my binding fabric, I need to find more. And a lot of times if the project's been sitting for any amount of time, you can't find the exact piece that you're looking for. So we have quilts laying around that aren't bound, but our binding's all in a tub with labeled as to which quilt it goes with. So just a plug for that. Other than that, we look forward to seeing you for our next class. We will be working on our next class shortly, and that will be the Chinese Lattice by Judy Niemeyer, and with our twist on it. So we're doing something pretty special with this pattern, and we'll be filming that pretty quick. So see you then.